Mabuhay! Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our conference entitled Indigenous Responses to Colonial Incursions. This event is in celebration of the 26th anniversary of the University of the Philippines Archaeological Studies Program and the quincentenary of Magellan's arrival in the Philippines. I am Liz Aldiano from UP Archaeological Studies Program, your host for this event. First, let me introduce the moderator for today's sessions. Our moderator is a PhD in anthropology graduate from the Department of Anthropology and Geography in University of Illinois, Chicago, USA. He specializes in remote sensing, geographic information system methods in archaeology, and currently an associate professor in UP-ASP. Please welcome, and I'm going to pass the mic to Dr. Michael Armand P. Canilao. Sir Migs?
Morning, everyone. Thank you, Liz. We'll begin session one, and our very first presenter is attorney Jose Mario de Vega. Si Jose Mario de Vega ay nakapagtapos ng kursong AB Political Science sa Olivares College at may masterado sa Filosofiya sa Universidad ng Pilipinas, Diliman. Nakapagtapos din siya ng kursong abogasya sa Philippine Law School. Siya ang may akda ng librong Dissente at Insurrecto o Dissente Part 2. Co-author ng librong Doing Ethics, Introduction to Moral Philosophy at isa sa mga patnugot ng mga aklat na ang monumento at ang tore sa kasaysayan, pagtatakda sa luneta, hiraya ng knights at pasya ng bayan, at pamana ng ika-19 na dantaon, pagtatakdang pangkasaysayan, bayani at hero sa pagbubuo ng bansa. Dati siyang nagtuturo ng mga asignatura sa Pilosopiya, Agham Panlipunan at Cursong Andres Bonifacio at Kilusang Katipunan sa Universidad de Manila. Siya rin ang una at dating direktor ng Kursong Andres Bonifacio at ang Kilusang Katipunan ng naturan ding pamantasan. Kamakailan ay nagbigay siya ng tampok na panayay sa sampaksaan ng limbagang pangkasaysayan ukol sa pantayong pananaw at paninindigang politikal na may pamagat na ang kakulangan ng pantayong pananaw at panganib ng kanan nitong tendensiya at ang pagpapalakas ng kaliwa nitong elemento tungo sa sosyalistang lipunang Pilipino. Kasalukuyan siyang nag-aaral sa Universidad ng Pilipinas, Diliman sa programang doktorado sa Philippine Studies. Atin pong batiin si Attorney Jose Mario de Vega para sa ating pinakaunang presentasyon ngayong umaga. Attorney?
Magandang umaga. Maraming po salamat, Dr. Michael Calinaw, sa inyong introduction sa akin. Gayun din na gusto kong batiin ang kabuuan ng ating ASP sa pagdiriwang po ng ng inyong ika-26 taong anibersaryo. Pagbati din sa ating sa bumubulat ng koleyo, gayon din kay sa ating minamahal na Chancellor Fidel Nemenso. At nakita ko po sa programa, magsasalita sana si Dr. Paz, pero baka mamaya po. Muli salamat po. Ito po ang aking papel, no? The Katipunan's concept of the Hari ng mga Tagalog and the Path to Kalayaan. Gusto kong muling magpasalamat sa departamento sa pagkakataon na ako'y mapili bilang isa sa mga tagapagsalita. Karangalan po. Okay, let me begin with the Ladja Revolt of 1643. It was said that Don Pedro Ladja was a Moro Bornean and a self-claimed descendant of Lacandula who came to Malolos in 1643. What is the reason of the revolt? His land was confiscated by the Spaniards. So, you know, this is the continuing script of our non-stop rebellions against the Spanish, no? The confiscation of land, polo y servicio, etc., injustices. So he proclaimed himself as the king of the Tagalogs, no? Or the hari ng mga Tagalog. This was despite the fact that a Paris priest tried to convince him not to pursue his plans. Of course, it will, upon his capture, he was brought to Manila, where he was executed. So I would like to call the attention of the reader here. So the rebellion was in Bulacan, probably certain parts of Pampanga, there in region in Central Luzon, as we know now. But when he was captured, why is it that he has to be brought to Manila? Of course, because you're a rebel, you have to be brought to the capital to show to the whole world that this is what we do to the rebels. Now you will be executed at the capital to serve as a warning to future rebels that this will be the thing that will happen to you. Questions. What is the significance of Ladya's invocation that he is a descendant of Praha Matanda? Because he claimed that he is a relative of Praha Matanda. So what? This is for purposes of royalty. I'm a royal. Political recognition, successional rights. Because if you remember, if you are a Datu or a Lakan, the Spanish at the initial phase of their conquest gave certain degree of leeway or what you call that, certain concessions. But of course, later they will not, as always, they will not keep their promise. So that led, if you remember, in the conspiracy of the Tagalog, of 1589 to 1588. And this conspiracy, as you know, was a national in scope. So Luzon, Visayas, Mindanao, and there is also a foreign element. What is, I said the foreign element in a quotation mark because as we know, Malaysia now and, Borneo, Indonesia, certain parts of Brunei were also included in that conspiracy. So our rebel, Ladya, claims that he is a descendant of that royalty, Praha Matanda. So in doing so, he's also in a way invoking the conspiracy of the Tagalog that happened nearly 100 years ago, isn't it? So if he came from Borneo, then what the hell is he doing here? So if he's a Bornean and then he's in Bulacan, so does it mean that back then there is no such thing as a boundary between the Philippines, Indonesia, and Malaysia, etc., as we presently know now? Finally, what is the socio-political and historical implication of his claim that he is allegedly the king of the Tagalog? The pertinent question there is, where did Ladya get the concept or the idea of the hari ng mga Tagalog? Moving on, Hermano Pule and the Confradía de San Jose Revolt. As we know, in 1841, when Hermano Pule, his adherents with the help of some of their allies, the tribal cultural communities, successfully repulsed the initial attack of the Spanish forces in their base there in Tayabas. It was the people in the town folks of the said area, present-day Quezon and some parts of Laguna and Batangas, who declared him as the hari ng mga Tagalog. So the questions and the distinction there are the following, or as follows. Again, it is utterly relevant and pertinent to ask the central questions. No? Where did both Ladya and Pule got the concept of the hari ng mga Tagalog? Is it in Borneo? Is it here? Or is it probable to state that the concept or the very idea is already prevalent in some parts of Southeast Asia then? Be that as it may, the distinction between the two herejes or filibusteros is that Ladya's claim that he is the hari ng mga Tagalog is a self-proclamation. So he is the one who proclaimed himself. But the question is, why do some of our people then believe him and even join the revolt? So he said, oh, let's have a revolt. I am the hari ng mga Tagalog. And the people believe. They even join him. The question there is why? While to Pule, it was the people who gave him the title or the honor. So I would like to invite the attention of our people and the participant to watch that movie, Hermano Pule. There is I really love a famous scene there wherein they won the battle, the first part, and then one of his adjutant gave him the bolo and say, Hermano Pule, ikaw na ngayon ang hari ng mga Tagalog. So ikaw na ngayon. So the question there is, sino ang hari ng mga Tagalog noon? You know? Hence the question there is, where the hell does the people themselves got the idea or the concept of the hari ng mga Tagalog? So it is not only the leaders who says that they are, that our people then also have their own concept of the hari ng mga Tagalog. So we move on now to the Katipunan, which is the heart of this lecture. 240 years later, God Andres Bonifacio and the anak ng bayan, mga anak ng bayan, established the KKK or the Katipunan. As we know, people, our traditional knowledge of the foundation of the Katipunan is wrong. We believe, we grew on the text that it was July 7th, 1892. But thanks to Jim Richardson in his book, The Light of Liberty, 2014, we learned that the establishment of the Katipunan is much earlier, and it practically changed our view on history, our scholastic historiography, etc. Because it was established in January of 1892, as per the documents. As we all know, their ultimate aim is to strangle, to separate from and destroy through violent means the Spanish power of these islands. I would like to call your attention to see the foundational document, which can be found again in that book of Jim Richardson, no? The Light of Liberty. You will see there that back then we have a different orthography. So if you read the one of the foundational document, it's written there that ang sangkapuluang ito ay jumijiwalay na. Hindi po ba? But if you read it today, it is properly understood as ang sangkapuluang ito ay humihiwalay na, no? Sa sukubang walang yang inang Espanya, something of that sort, no? So through violent means, and to return to inang bayan, the kalayaan or liberty and kaginhawahan, and which I translated as well-being. There is a debate here, people, with regard to the translation of well-being with regard to our kaginhawahan, but that's not the that will not be covered by this paper. To me, I will not look at the dissimilarity, but more on the similarity of well-being and kaginhawahan. No, of all people that were born and bred here. So who are these Tagalog? I would like to invite your attention to the footnote of Jacinto sa Cartilla. So the Tagalog are all those people that were born and bred here, no? So lahat ng tao na dito ay tumubo. So the Tagalog refers to the Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao, no? And the Katipunan, though using violent means, will still use all of this using reason. Katwira, no? Which I translated that reason. Again, there is a debate here, people, with regard to the distinction between reason and katwiran, because again, some scholars in Philippine academia says that, the West reason or right zone is different from our katwiran. Hindi ko na po papatulan po yan. Ano? Again, I would like to look at the similarities rather than the differences. Next, Bonifacio's political philosophy of the nation or inang bayan, he utilized and consciously transformed the concept or the idea of the hari ng mga Tagalog, not as a claim or a title to a single person that will lead our people, but rather as a political term or entity, or the appropriate name of the collective entity, as I stated, of the emergent nation, which is this, our nation, no? That he called as inang bayan, or Haring Bayang Katagalugan to be exact. This act of Bonifacio is giving and going back to the people themselves their very own concept or idea, but in an all-encompassing, truly inclusive or expanded form. Why giving and going back to the people? Remember, if you go back to history, the concept of the hari ng mga Tagalog came from the people. Correct? So when it is now the time or the turn of Bonifacio, what he did is he looked at the philosophy of the people. He grabbed this concept of the hari ng mga Tagalog, but instead of using it for his own, for certain group of people, he used it and expanded it. Meaning, the hari ng mga Tagalog is not a single person, but the whole people, you and me, you know, which is, in my view, very inclusive and very democratic. Moving on, Bonifacio's vision. His act of going back to the internal thoughts and inner ideas of the people is truly illuminating and noteworthy. He's a visionary, people. No? He incorporated his philosophy and vision of the future nation by recognizing and going back to the kalooban ng kanyang bayan, mga taong bayan. If you will allow me, let me quote from our book, which Professor Canilao mentioned earlier. This is the book of Bayanit Erwe, published in 2017 on page 80. Dito ay maliwanag na hindi mapapasubalian ni naman ang malalim na pag-iisip at pagtingin ng Supremo sa pagsimsim at pagdalumat sa mga umiiral na mga kaisipan, pananaw at filosofiya na nasa loob ng mga kalooban ng taong bayan at namamayani sa kanilang mga diwa, gunita at kamalayan na nakabatay sa ating paniniwala na pamanat kalinangan ng ating mga ninuno ng historical, material at empirikal na salalayan ay walang dili iba kundi ang mahalagang pahina ng mga pakikibaka, mga kabangyamang karanasan, mga pagsisikap, pananalig, pag-asa at paghihirap, gayon din ang kanilang mga simulain, pagmamahal, pag-ibig ng ating mga sinauna o mga naunang totoo at lantay na mga ninunod mandirigma. The HBK or the Haring Bayang Katalugan is you and me, all of us. It simply means that to Bonifacio and the Katipuneros, the glorious and noble act of unifying the sons and the daughters of the nation for purposes of returning to Inang Bayan, Her Kalayaan, or the Haring Bayang Katagalugan is the responsibility of each and every one of us. Again, let me quote a portion of that of our book. Kalabisan ng sabihin pa, ngunit ang inobasyon at appropriation, paggagagap, pagdalumat ng Supremo may pag-asa sa nasabing konseptong bayan ay tunay na napaka-revolusyonaryo na nagpapakita ng kanyang matining at malalim na pag-iisip. Pinapakita rin ng kanyang makabuluhang akto, hindi lamang ang lawak ng kanyang pangunawa, kundi ang kanyang panghinaharap na bisyon para sa kanyang mga kababayan. At ito po ay pinapatunayan ng ating madugo at marangal na kasaysayan. Alalaong baga, ang Haring Bayang Katagalugan ay pumapatungkol hindi lamang sa ilang bahagi ng populasyon, kundi ikaw at ako o tayong lahat. Kaya nga central din sa filosofiya ng Katipunan ang konsepto ng kapatid o kapatiran. The significance of the Hari ng mga Tagalog, which was transformed into Haring Bayang Katagalugan. I certainly believe, people, that it's an affirmation of our glorious past. And where can you get it? From his writing, Ang Dapat Mabatid ng Mga Tagalog, wherein he invoked reasons numerous times. And again, he invoked it 4 or 5 times at the latter part of that article. It is a rhetoric of resistance and defiance. Hindi kami Pelepenas, no? Kami ay Haring Bayang Katagalugan. It is a continuing inspiration for the contemporary Katipuneros now who are still fighting for karapatan, no? Rights, freedom, and kalayaan, liberty. Earlier, our beloved Chancellor noted our continuous rebellion against occupation, colonization, and now we're fighting on 2 fronts, the pandemic and the satanic administration of Mr. Duterte. Then the enemy is the Spaniards and the Filipinos. Now it is Mang Kanor, its evil cohorts, and the satanic regime of Pentinilismo. The continuing legacy and challenge to us of our Katipunan heroes, they joined the movement. They heed the call of Pinangbayan. To quote Jim Richardson, they risked their lives because they desired passionately, in the words of their cartilla, to unite the hearts and minds of all, in order that this union may be strong enough to tear aside the thick veil that obscures thought and to find the true path of reason and enlightenment. They deserve to be remembered and honored as truly were as patriots who saw liberty as the path to progress and who stood up to fight for liberty. Maraming salamat po sa inyo mga kapatid, mga kasama. Tuloy ang himagsikan, padayon, yabado up to the max, may pag-asa. Muli, mabuhay ang ASP. Pagbati po sa inyong anibersaryo. Mabuhay po kayo, may pag-asa. Salamat po.
Maraming salamat po, Attorney. Sa puntong ito po ay nais lang po naming pasalamatan ang mga miyembro ng Conference Committee for organizing this event. Sa pangunguna ni Eli Lim, si Liz Aldiano, Jane Carlos, Ara Espigar at Ana Pineda. Maraming salamat po. Let's proceed with our session 1 panel and our second group of panelists. We have Dieminlyn, Sion, and Devy Flores, co-authors collaborating on this presentation. They are both incoming third-year college students this coming semester in Verdad Christian College, Caloocan. Miss Sion is currently taking Bachelor of Arts in Communication, while Miss Flores is taking Bachelor of Arts in Broadcasting. Although they're both taking communication-related course, they want to apply their research and communication skills to make factual and informative presentations. Upon joining this event, they are mentored by their history professor. So let us welcome our co-panelists, our co-presenters, Devy and Dieminlyn. Good morning.
Hello, everyone. Today, we will be discussing to you the uncolonized land of Cordillera. I am Demi, and I am with my partner, Dev Flores. So let's start. This presentation, Uncolonized Land of Cordillera, this presentation intends to reveal the response of the Igorots in Cordillera during the Spanish occupation. So we will know the how the Spaniards tried to pacify the Igorots, if the Spaniards successfully possessed the gold mines, and how the Igorots remained independent during that time. So let's start. Whenever the Philippine history is brought up, people often says that we Filipinos are colonized by the Spaniards, Japanese, and Americans. So by bringing up this information, the reality that not all Filipinos were colonized in the Spanish occupation becomes something that is really hard to believe. Kasi nga, kalat yung kaalaman sa atin na sinakop yung buong Pilipinas ng mga Espanyol. So the first thing that we are going to be talking about is the Pueblo. This is because the Spaniards were not able to do the reduction amongst the people who resides in Cordillera. And these are the Igorots. Now, why is it so important for the Spaniards to do the reduction or to make the Igorots submit to them? The reason is that the villages of Igorots were heavily distant from one another. Sabing kalat-kalat sila. And it would really be hard for the Spaniards to control them, to try to pacify them, if they say like that. So how did the Spaniards try to make the Igorots believe them? One of the ways that they used is the 3G, which is God, Gold, and Glory, in which they purposely focuses on the religion part, wherein if the Igorots were to be converted, they will be relocated to the Pueblo. Now let us proceed to the factors of their resistances. Number 1 is the religion. Another reason why the Spaniards weren't able to colonize the Igorots, particularly mentioned from Antolin's book, The Notices on the Pagan Igorots, The mountains of Cordillera is hard to explore, for their villages were hard to reach. Also, whenever there are Spaniards or friars who comes to the mountain and ask for directions kung saan yung village nila, ang ginagawa ng Igorot, minimislead nila, binibigyan nila ng ibang information kung saan pa pwedeng pumunta yung mga Espanyol. And that is a smart move kasi they are really avoiding these people from reaching their villages. Again, why do they do these things? Bakit ginagawa to ng mga Igorot? This is because the Igorots knows that if the Spaniards reach their villages, these Spaniards will ask them to become Christians, just like the other provinces in their lowland areas. Ayaw na mangyari yun ng mga Igorot. To know more details, the expedition report of Aldana in 1620 mentioned that he was tasked to do a punitive expedition in Cordillera to ask the Igorots to be baptized. So after 2 days of walking together with his companions, they met 50 chieftains of Igorots. So he proceeded to ask them that he would pardon all of their crimes if they agree to become Christians. So because prior to this expedition of Aldana, the King of Spain was notified by the friars that the Igorots were committing crimes and harassing the lowland converts. However, the Igorots said that they don't want to be baptized. Instead, they would pay them tribute. Babayaran na lang nila ng tributo yung mga fraile, yung mga Espanyol. Basta hindi sila i-convert sa Christianity. So, at that time, both parties didn't come up with a fitting solution to the problem, and so the Igorots just left them there. So, there are also instances wherein the Igorots were asked by the Spaniards some questions, informations about them, and the Igorots were giving wrong information to the Spaniards, but they are taking the incentives like food. So, iiwanan na lang sila ng mga Espanyol. On the other hand, yung mga Espanyol, they have no idea that they were fooled by their so-called savage Igorots. Yeah. So this aversion of Igorots to the idea of being converted is not enclosed to themselves. They also prevented the other provinces near the Cordillera from becoming Christians. An example to this is the expedition led by Father Heras in 1755. In order to convert people in Pangasinan, they have to make an easy road near the territory of the Igorots. But because of how violent the Igorots were, the Spaniards brought 1,500 Filipinos para daw sa safety nila, just so they can cross these passages that they discovered prior to this expedition. Another case similar to this is when the Igorots took the baptized children of Ilocos right after they burned the church in San Nicolas, Pangasinan. After din nila sunugin yung church na yon, pumatay sila at nagnakaw sila sa mga Kristiyano sa Pangasinan. Ang mga bata na kinuha nila, these baptized children, they were raised under their indigenous religion. So from here, we can say that the Igorots did something that they have no right to do, which is to raise these children into a religion that they or their parents didn't consent to. Another thing, if the Igorots would become Christians, they would have to praise God. They would have to stop headhunting since it's against the divine law. Siyempre, yun yung turo ng mga praile. The Igorots would also have to live in an entirely different environment wherein they are under the control of the Spanish government. So whenever the friars would come to them and ask the Igorots to be baptized, they were always against it, like always against it. Furthermore, in 1857, Roberto Alarcon met a seriously ill young boy, an Igorot. When he told the parents of this boy that he would go to heaven if he is baptized, the mother replied that she doesn't want his child in heaven, but here in earth with a medicine that can cure his young boy. So from here, we can see that the religion of the Igorots played a great part in their resistances towards the Spaniards because they are really devoted to their religion. Now let us proceed to the other resistances of the Igorots with my partner. Thank you.
So let us proceed to the next factor of their resistance. This is about protecting their gold mines. If we're going to recall the intention or aims of the Spaniards, the 3G, with God, gold, and glory, there's no wonder why the Spaniards are eager to convince the Filipinos to be converted. When it happens, they would be able to take control of them, and at the same time, they would be able to possess the gold. If they would be successful to do that, the glory would be added to them. So yun, panahon pa lang ni Salcedo, na apo ni Miguel Lopez de Legazpi, a report came to them that the Cordillera is very rich in gold. A Dominican friar, Francisco Antolin, sent an Igorot Christian convert, namely Thomas, together with a Christian companion to go to Cordillera to find the exact location of the gold mine. But the gold mines are really hidden, and only the entrusted or authorized persons exactly knew the route or location. And as a matter of fact, the route towards the mines is really covered by the grasses. So tagong-tago siya. Okay? Due to the difficulty to reach the gold mine, they frequently do expeditions upang magpakasakali na matuntun nila yung exact na location. Okay? And upon doing that, they collected some information. Nakakolekta sila ng mga ilang impormasyon o facts about kung nasaan ba talaga yon. Pero, hindi nila totally na-possess kasi the Igorots are strong and wise enough to protect and hide their mining sites from the outsiders. The next factor is about their contentment to social order, their social order. If the Igorots were to be baptized, it's obvious that the Spaniards would take control of their life. And according to Antolin's notices in the pagan Igorots, they are free to do what they like. Okay? And this can be also included on what they are accustomed to. Igorots are contented to stay on their mountain, and they don't want to settle in the lowlands. They only want to come down. Gusto lang nilang bumaba kapag meron silang bibilhin sa baba. Like for example, yung mga makakain nila, like for example, pigs, chickens, carabaos, or may mga binibili rin silang doon na raw cottons from Ilocos and G-strings at marami pang iba. Na basta, yung mga material na yon o yung mga iba pang bagay na binibili nila sa baba, according sa mga sources namin, binibili nila yan sa baba kasi wala silang ganun sa taas. Okay? Sa bundok, rather. Rots are contented to stay on their mountains and they don't want to settle in the lowlands, and they only want to come down whenever they need to purchase something. And also, they want to protect their territory by not allowing others, specifically the Christians, or they might bring sickness caused by the lowland epidemic into their villages. And another thing, unlike the Christians, Igorots do not assign duties to one another. They are free to do what job they want to take. They prefer, and they also prefer to practice their traditions. So we're done with the factors of the Igorots' resistance. And another thing that you have to know about this is their defense tactics. These defense tactics pertains on how the Igorots dealt from the attacks of the Spaniards. And in 1759, the Igorots were attacked by the Spaniards. Their idols and houses were destroyed and burned. The Igorots who survived the battle didn't think of submitting to the Spaniards. Instead, they retreated further up the mountain. So, yung mga nakasurvive na mga Igorot mula sa laban, instead na magpasakop sila, sumuko sila doon sa kapangyarihan ng mga Espanyol, ang ginawa nila, umakyat sila sa mas mataas na area ng bundok at doon sila nagtago. Okay? And in addition, one of the factors as to why the Igorots choose to live deeper in the mountains is because of their unfamiliarity with the Christian traditions. And some other references said that they are not willing to do the practices of Christians. Thus, they're already satisfied to do what. Moreover, in relation to this situation, there are some Filipino Christian converts from lowland areas who take refuge in
Hello,
Cordillera.
Miss Devy May. Sorry to interrupt. Mahina daw po kasi yung audio ninyo. So, pwede niyo po bang pakilakasan na lang po ang inyong mic o kaya lumapit sa inyong mic siguro. Salamat.
Pasensya na po. And moreover, in relation to this situation, there are some Filipino Christian converts from lowland areas who take refuge in Cordillera. They are known as Tulisan or Tulisanes. The Igorots allowed them to take refuge, but they are not obliged to convert into their religion. And as a matter of fact, before the lowlanders were controlled by the Spaniards, they also refused and resisted. But as indicated on the Igorot responses to Spanish aims of William Henry Scott, one of the factors why the Cordillera is difficult to control or invade is because of the ruggedness of the mountain. Unlike in the lowland areas, which is easier to invade or undertake. In addition, the lowland Filipinos also believe to the promises of the Spaniards that they would give them a food, shelter, a chance to work, etc. before they agreed to be converted and relocated to the pueblos. And that's it. Let us proceed to the conclusion, Ms. Ron.
So to sum it all up, the Spaniards failed to pacify and persuade the Igorots to be converted to Christianity, which we can see that played a great factor to be able to colonize them. And also the Igorots were really loyal to their indigenous beliefs and traditions. They're also not interested, like not one bit interested to the practices of Christians because they still prefer to follow their indigenous beliefs with passion and loyalty. They also give value to their properties, indigenous beliefs, their traditions, as giving value to the legacy of their ancestors. Moreover, the Spaniards knew something about their gold mines, but they were not able to claim it because the Igorots were wise enough to hide it from the outsiders. And also, for the Igorots, they are contented to what they have. So they think that they didn't need to settle with the Christians. Therefore, when the Spaniards started to make the expeditions in Cordillera, the Igorots already made their own way to resist. And this resistance, this refusal is strong enough, which makes the Spanish expeditions in Cordillera fruitless. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Demi and Dev. We will be sending you the recruitment package for the Archaeology Studies Program. We hope you can plan to join us for graduate studies after finishing your undergrad. We will have our open forum later for questions. At this point, again, that we just recognize our organizers, the conference committee headed by Ellie Lim, Liz Ardiano, Jane, Carlos, Ara Espigar, and Ana Pineda. And guaranteed, there's no Pareto principle here. We're 80% done by just 20%, but 100% everyone contributed to this endeavor. Of course, through the leadership of our director, who is moderator 2 tomorrow, Dr. Lee Anthony Neri. Our third speaker for this session is Mr. Scott Mágkachi Sabóy. He is a Kalinga Bontoc academic and creative writer who now teaches English in Bahrain. He is a former professor at UP Baguio, where he finished his master's in language and literature, and where he is slated to do his PhD in Indigenous Studies, this new course developed there, starting this academic year. His current scholarly works focus on Cordillera studies, especially Kalinga ethnopop music, Banao Kalinga language and culture documentation, Igorot cultures vis-a-vis fundamentalist Christianity, and indigenous tourism. So let us welcome Mr. Sabóy, who's joining us from Bahrain, I believe. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Dr. Canilao, naimbag na bigat kenka. And maraming salamat po sa UP Diliman Archaeological Studies Program sa pagkakataong ito na makasalamuha kayo sa online conference na ito. So let me share my screen. So I'm going to talk about the Kalinga hero Lagutaw, who, by the way, is also considered a hero in Cagayan. Oh no, in Isabela. Now, one legacy of European colonialism to the Americas was disease, especially smallpox and measles, which contributed to the depopulation of natives. It was no different from the Spanish colonization of the Philippines, which brought the plague to the country towards the end of the 1500s. The disease continued to wreak havoc on the native population even up to the 1800s. A case in point was Guillermo Galvez' decimation, primarily of the Ibaloy Igorots in what is now known as the municipality of La Trinidad, province of Benguet. Scott also records a related account of a late 18th century smallpox epidemic in some areas of what are now known as the provinces of Cagayan and Isabela, which gave rise to a little-known revolt and eventual martyrdom of a Kalinga hero named Lagutaw. This paper seeks to analyze the Lagutaw narrative using an indigenous paradigm, which, as defined by Raunacoacanan, is a culturally specific discourse based on indigenous people's premises, values, and worldview. It also reflects on the implications of the narrative and its analysis in relation to contemporary indigenous people's concerns. In so doing, I hope to show the timeless import of this short-lived resistance. As you can see on screen, there are 6 major sections of the paper, but I'll be discussing only the first 3 for lack of time. And as you may have noticed, there's a bit of disparity between the abstract and the structure of this discussion, because I had actually expanded the paper after submitting the abstract of the paper. Anyway, so the slide shows the gist of the narrative. The story was tragic in one respect. 2 blood brothers, the elder a recalcitrant pagan, the younger a devout Christian, break their brotherhood and ignite a battle on the day of a triumphant welcome, Palm Sunday. The pagan is killed on the day of betrayal, Holy Wednesday, and the Christian dies of grief on Resurrection Day, Easter. It was certainly anticlimacteric as well in one sense, for within 3 days, a ragtag group of 1,200 rebels with hundreds of women and children in tow encamp and ready themselves for a gallant stand against a 2,300-man army. Then, the rebel leader falls right at the very first volley of enemy gunfire. His followers are quickly routed, many of them massacred. The end. Fortunately, the story does not really end there. For in writing about it, William Henry Scott, outwardly American but inwardly Filipino, enabled us to continue the narrativization of a dark chapter in the history of what was once called, quote, the empire on which the sun never sets, unquote, and of a tiny yet iconic landmark in the history of the mountain peoples of the Philippine North. The text presents 2 responses of natives to foreign incursions. Onofre Liban personifies submission, while Lagutaw embodies defiance. And there's Scott records the exchange, the argumentation between the Liban and Lagutaw, a part of which is shown on screen. Now, this verbal exchange is insightful in that it depicts diametrically opposed perspectives on what the elders of my tribe call or regard as the vital, intertwined, and non-negotiable aspects of our indigenous identity: Viag, or life, Jayaw, honor, and Sanikwa, property. Now, these are some of the elders I've been learning from in my tribe, the Vanaos of Western Kalinga. And I continue to be grateful that they continue to share with me their wisdom across the years. Now, notice how all these three play out in the disputation of the two brothers. There's no time to discuss all the details here, but it suffices to say that if you look at Liban's perspective on life, life, honor, and property or abode, it's really a marked contrast to Lagutaw's perspective, because he had adopted a foreign worldview. What can explain Liban's capitulation to foreign rule and worldview? How comes it that he willingly let his Spanish masters take control over his life and that of his own people, uproot them from their land and dispossess them of their properties and violate their honor? Perhaps the explanation lies largely in the Spaniards' effective tactics of subjugation. The text reveals three interlinked and time-tested tactics used by colonizers throughout history to effect a strategy of subjugation: resettlement, indoctrination, and political appointments. We see these tactics prefigured in the Jesuits' conquest of Native Americans as described by Kushner. Resettlement. In this case, the highlanders were resettled in the lowlands under an ecclesiastical authority and were thus, as historians refer to it, under the bell or bajo de la campana. Now, indigenous identity is embedded in the pita or land and circumscribed by the Vugis tribal territory or tribal boundary. Indigenous peoples' lands are sources of livelihood and provide the means of survival. Thus, interwoven with the rice field, the forest, mountain, and river, or payao, ginugat, dilig, and wangwang respectively, is the material and non-material cultural fabric of indigenous culture. For instance, Vugis is an essential component of the Wajong, the Peace Pact system, and the stipulations in the Pagta, or the Peace Pact Code, necessarily includes delineations of geophysical and cultural territories. Tribal folklore is tied to specific geographical features and local flora and fauna as well. And the human lifespan from birth to death is networked with a web of beliefs and practices that draw inspiration from the land. So enticing the mountaineers to resettle in the lowlands and or forcing them to remain in the lowlands was an attempt to change their concept of home. When you change anyone's concept of home, you can change the trajectory of his or her life. If you can make one forget the village hearth, you can take his or her heart anywhere. So away from the land of their ancestors, they were made to acquire new identities and consciousness, new names, new social classification, new worldview, new values, and new lifestyle. Uprooting them from their native lands is thus a way of rerouting the trajectory of their collective existence. Indoctrination. In one sense, religion was used by the Spaniards as a tool of oppression, disenfranchisement, and division. In the case of Liban and his people, resettling them also meant herding them into a religious corral, thus changing not only their concept of home, but also their very notion of spirituality. Under the tutelage of their new masters, they replaced their shaman with a priest, native rituals with liturgy, and tribal folklore with Judeo-Christian traditions. So, from the way I look at it, philosophically, the attack on the indigenous mind was effectively waged on three levels. And the Judeo-Christian worldview replaced the indigenous or tribal worldview. As you can see on the screen, the Judeo-Christian worldview has a compartmentalized view of spirituality. And the god of the Kavunyan of the indigenous peoples, the god of all tribes, was replaced with a god of theology and sectarianism. The sources of knowledge and the means or by which knowledge is obtained among the indigenous peoples were replaced by story of saints, patristic writings, priestly mediation, biblical histofiction, and biblical hermeneutics. And when it comes to what is ethical, especially in relation to the community, the Judeo-Christian worldview dictates that doctrine is to be prioritized over kinship, because the cause of discipleship can be forsaking the family. And Christian theology also discourages being unequally yoked with unbelievers. From this foregoing discussion, it is easy to note how it was that from an off-relevance vantage point, leaving behind his tribal community and his traditions was a worthy sacrifice in the name of piety and discipleship. In biblical parlance, forsaking his Canaanite roots was worth the price for his initiation to the new Israel, the church. Political appointments. Finally, turning carefully selected natives into politicians in the new community ensured the colonizers that their new converts are properly introduced and effectively subdued under a new form of government. Under this form of administration, the pangat, or the tribal leader or chief, or the mangiugod, the arbiter, and the mangjon hivojong, or the peace pact holder, are shunted aside, and their functions are either vested in or coursed through political appointees like an Ofraliban in close coordination with the priest and the army commander. With these three tactics, the colonizers effected their strategy of subjugation. In Arthurian terms, an ideological state apparatus, the church, was deployed in tandem with the repressive state apparatus, the army or police, to contain the natives' movement, condition their minds, and crush their will. And with the incidental aid of an epidemic, the asymmetrical warfare the colonizers waged against the natives was a resounding success. Now, there are lots of things to unpack in the Lagutaw narrative, especially in relation to Indigenous people's concerns today, but we have no time for those. So let's proceed to the concluding part of this lecture. Now, part of the discussion would have been the issue of appropriation, even the practice of traditional rituals in conjunction with Christian traditions in some indigenous communities in the Cordillera, as well as the recent issue involving Nas Academy and Huang Ud. But as I said, there's no time to discuss all those things. Now, it suffices for now to say, by way of summation, that the Lagutaw narrative is timeless in that it points to an ongoing revolution of cultural reaffirmation and our lifelong goal of being and staying free. Which leads me to a quote I got from a short story which I read back in high school. The story is entitled "Give It Back to the Indians," and if my memory serves me right, it was written by Bill Messenger. Now, in that story, an old Native American said, "The future is the same for all of us. Nothing keeps one form for long. Mountains crumble to become plains and valleys, lakes become reedy marshes. The great ice flows melt and rivers rise to forested valleys. We are men and women for a time before we rejoin the blown sands of creation. Only once can we know the world as well as live in it. Only once do we move at our own command. That is why to be human is to be free." So the Lagutaw narrative is timeless for me because it talks about the value of humanity. Thank you. Maraming salamat po at mabuhay tayong lahat.
Maraming salamat po, Professor Sabóy. Sa puntong ito po ay magkakaroon na po tayo ng open forum para sa keynote natin, si Dr. Victor Paz, at ang ating mga speakers sa session 1, si Attorney Vega, si Demi at Dev, at siyempre po si Professor Sabóy. Meron na po tayong mga katanungan dito na naipasa sa akin ng ating conference organizers. At ito po ay naka-address para kay Dr. Victor Paz from Anonymous. Greetings, ASP, on your 26th anniversary. There are undeniable similarities of material culture shared that are spread across neighboring geographical areas. Is there any suggestion made based on studies done if such were a result of migration versus assimilation or both? Thank you. Para po kay Dr. Paz.
Oh, definitely. Migration is the first and easiest explanation to commonalities. In fact, the opposite of it was an old reaction in the late 60s in archaeology, where early 70s, where people started giving migration a bad name, it became a negative view to even think of cultures or individuals moving because the emphasis was on internal dynamics. Now, that's an extreme, just like the other extreme would be hyperdiffusionism, for example. So the reality of it is within the different shades in the middle, where we see, we just have to ask ourselves, if you see the same, if you have patterns and you see the same objects, are these separately invented, or were there interaction going on? And that's something that one has to appreciate. We were never isolated. I mean, cultures. For me, this is one of my critique of older how we are trained. We like to think cultures are isolated before they interact. Because it's simpler that way, don't you think? No? That way, it's easier to find markers. No, to say once this is introduced, then the culture will change. But then it swings too much to the idea that everything that changes, cultural changes happen because of interventions from outside. So then you have the opposite reaction. No? So the beauty of what is happening now, we are generating always new information, new data. There's always something new coming out every year because as long as we search, as long as we reread, we reinterpret old documents, and we excavate new archaeological sites, we are always, then it becomes richer. And we don't have to go back to very simple explanations. So short answer is yes. Migration of people, interaction has always been a explanatory, what do you call this, dynamics, no? To all of this commonalities.
Thank you, Dr. Paz. Ang ating next question po ay para kay Dr. Paz ulit mula kay Ramon de Leon. Ako po ay pinanganak sa Cavite City. Noon pong maliit kaming mga bata, kapag ikaw ay taga Cavite City, ang tawag sa iyo ay Tagaloob. Pero kung ikaw ay naninirahan sa labas ng Cavite City, ang tawag sa iyo ay Tagalabas. Nagkaroon po ng darang diskriminasyon noon. Ako po ay 75 years old na. Parang ano po.
Magandang anecdote yan at maganda ring sabihin na hindi yan rare, no? Alam mo yung othering na ginagawa natin ay very common yan, di ba? And anthropologically makita natin anywhere in the world, di ba? Yung kailangan i-distinguish mo yung sarili mo sa iba, no? Maraming dahilan, maraming paliwanag kung bakit ginagawa yan, no? For example, but double-edged yun. No? Halimbawa, hindi ka pwede mag-asawa ng Tagaloob kasi yung Tagaloob ay malamang kamag-anak mo yan. So, naghahanap ka ng asawa, ng partner na Tagalabas. And then, papasok ngayon dyan kung titira ka doon sa kanila o titira sila sa iyo. Depende sa kung ano yung pattern na dominant sa culture. Pero hindi yan black and white. So, yan ang maganda kasi for the longest time, because of the state, diba? And of course, yung powers that be, even now, diba? Ang NPA ay tinatawag ng mga taong labas. Ang taong labas ay may masamang connotation as if wala silang kinaibahan sa highway robbers, highwaymen. Kasi iba yung highwaymen, magnanakaw lang talaga yun, hold-upper yun. No? Pero yung phenomena ng lumalabas ka, ay at again hindi original sa akin to pero nabasa ko na to kay Leto nung araw pa pero sa aking sariling pag-aaral na-reinforce lang to sa lahat ng ibang nabasa ko at sa nakikita kong phenomena na hindi talaga masama ang tingin sa labas. Sa katunayan, ang consciousness natin bilang community ay integrated yung idea ng labas. No? Integrated yung idea na. And maraming per community siguradong iba ang dahilan dyan. No? Pero isang nakita kong pattern historically na I'm sure yung mga tiga Cavite will also went through it. No? Malaking bagay yung idea, yung slave raiding, yung so-called moral raids. No? Sa idea ng labas. No? Yung paglilikas ka. No? Magtatago ka muna. Tapos maraming integrated pa na iba pang phenomena integrated dyan. But, so, ang aking sagot din dyan, to summarize it, hindi na tayo, mahirap na maging yung clear binary division, no? Ng loob at ng labas. Pero, magandang, pag snapshot ang usapan, si X ba ay taong labas o loob, depende sa anong time anong period in time, right? So yung taong labas ay dating loob at naging labas, tapos minsan loob na naman, minsan, depende sa period of time. No? Importante yun. Usapin na yun. Yeah. So yun, maganda yun, no? Cavite nga, lalo na Cavite City. No? Dahil sentro sila. Lalo na nung buhay pa yung mga pader. Cavite City was like Intramuras. It was walled in, all flattened after the Second World War. But nandun pa yung, nahanap namin yung Porta Vaga, yung entrance to Cavite Puerto. No? But that's it. Wala nang nakatayong pader.
Salamat po, Dr. Paz. Attorney De Vega, isang lang po, siguro makatulong rin po para sa ating mga audience kung to use Dr. Paz word, yung hermeneutics po. No? Ano po ba yung magandang gamitin nating definition ng hari at ng bayan? Salamat po, Attorney.
Salamat po sa inyong tanong. Magandang salungguhitan din po na yung salitang hari sa bahasa Melayo, bahasa Indonesia, ay pumapatungkol sa haring araw. So dalawa, no? Hari means day, hari means king. Sa akin po lecture, hindi ko masasagot kung saan po nanggaling yung konsepto ng hari. Pero ang masasagot ko po sa inyo, pumasok po yung ideya sa taong bayan. Kaya nga nakuha ni Ladya, nakuha ni Hermano Pule. At kung pagdating ho ni Gat Bonifacio, wala ka namang gagawin. Babalikan mo lang yung kultura at filosofiya ng bayan mo. Sinimsim niya, dinalumat niya, pinalago niya. Ngunit ang kaibahan, hindi na po yan pumapatungkol sa isang pinuno. Yan po ay pumapatungkol sa isang pangkabuong etnidad ng sangkapuluang ito. At ikaw at ako yun. At ang tawag po dyan ay ang Haring Bayang Katagalugan. So kung ikaw ay kontemporaryong Katipunero, hindi ka naniniwala sa Republika ng Pilipinas as stated by Republic Act, itong heraldic law, hindi po ba? Kasi nga, yung, di ba, may debate ngayon doon sa Pilipinas o Pilipinas, di po ba? So, yung mga naniniwala doon, Pilipinas. Pero kung ikaw naman ay pwede mo sabihin Haring Bayang Katagalugan. Dagdag ko lang po, kanina may nabasa akong isang tanong doon. Baka wala lang pa nung isaksa ko na. Ano yung representasyon ng araw? At gusto ko itong i-ugnay sa lecture ni Dr. Paz, yung sunburst na tinatawag niya, yung smiling face. Kung inyo pong matatandaan, may huling tula po ang si Rizal, hindi po ba? At ang isa sa mga unang nakabasa ng original is Andres Bonifacio. Isinalin niya po yan sa wikang Pilipino. Ano po? Makikita nyo doon, binago ni Bonifacio yung konsepto ni Rizal ng Diyos. Ang ginamit niyang salita ay bathala. Ang tanong, bakit bathala ang ginamit niya at hindi Diyos? Isa pang salita o termino na binago niya ay yung nasyon. Hindi niya ginamit ang nasyon. Ginamit niya yung salitang bayan. Hindi niya ginamit ang patria. Ginamit niya yung inang bayan. So meron siyang agenda. Di po ba? At mahalaga na masalungguhitan na iba ang direksyon ni Rizal sa direksyon ng Katipunan. Kumbaga ito is, yung Katipuneros is from below, if you'll call it that way. Or ano yung sinasabi ni Dr. Paz, baka mga taong labas to eh. Pero hindi lang sila labas, dahil labas at loob, kung ikaw ay aanib sa amin, ikaw ay kapatid. Gayun din, yung issue po ng bathala, ng araw, naniniwala ako na si Bonifacio mismo, yung araw ay pumapatungkol din kay bathala. So may pagbabalik sa nakalipas sabay sa pagyakap ng moderno. Salamat po.
Salamat po, Attorney. May mga katanungan din po tayo para kay Professor Sabóy at meron din pong mga katanungan ulit para kay Dr. Paz. Bago yan, may isang katanungan mula kay Dr. Jack Medrana para kay Devy at Dem. To Miss Demi and Dev, it is good you mentioned the Spaniards failed to build permanent pueblos in Baguio. Maybe you can say in the whole of the CAR. They only established mission stations and temporary pueblos, with many only in the mid-18th century and still at the periphery in the Magat Valley, Nueva Vizcaya. Because the upper Cagayan, where southern Isabela is located, and was the setting of Lagutaw's resistance, was only colonized around the mid-18th century, which means that colonial rule was not stable yet in the region. Mula kay Dr. Paz. Nice po bang maka-react doon, ano? Devy, Dem? Yep.
We failed to mention earlier the in expedition of Aldana, they reached the town of Boa, and what they did there is that they built these temporary pueblos, but when the Igorots accepted them, no, kasi nadudun sila, yung town of Boa nasa loob yun ng Cordillera, and the Igorots actually accepted them there, and I don't know if I can say na inambush sila ng mga Igorot after maubos yung mga resources na dala-dala nila. So here we can see na yung mga Igorot sobrang tuso sila. Hindi lang sila basta nagpakita ng resistance towards the Spanish incursions. Kasi nga nilabanan talaga nila, and then pumatay sila ng mga Spaniards at that time nung alam nila na wala nang pakinabang yung mga Espanyol sa kanila. Yun po. Thank you.
Okay, salamat. Meron pang mga ibang katanungan pero balikan natin mamaya. Ngayon para kay Professor Scott Sabóy. Thank you to all speakers for all your interesting topics. My concern, although most of these are comments, reactions. Number one, I thought that Lagutaw was Yogad because the setting was in Etiague, Isabela. This is also from Dr. Jack Medrana. Thank you, Professor. Sir, you're muted, Professor Sabóy.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
As I noted earlier in the early part of my talk, the Lagutaw was or is also considered as a hero by the government of Isabela, primarily because of the location of his uprising. But as also noted by Scott, the mountain peoples at the time were generally called Kalinga, of course, which was actually an exonym, which Billiat and Lambrecht in their book The Ulalim regarded as a term that had no factual basis. So anyway, so he was called a Kalinga, and therefore even the Kalingas considered him as their cultural hero as well.
Thank you, Professor Sabóy. And to follow another question, yes, Dr. Paz, please go ahead.
How can I just interject that, and I like the answers so far and the reaction of Jack, that really central to this question is the ethnicity of people. No? So, maganda kayo po kay Lagutaw. No? Ano ba ethnicity niya? Kasi lahat they are labeled, no? Just like maganda yung paper, no, ni Flores at ni Sion. They use a very generic and appropriated term, no? Yung igorot, no? Nung araw napaka-derogatory na term na yan, no? But now it is parang moro yan, eh, no? It was already appropriated, no? But I don't know nga if in the case of Lagutaw, has he, parang sila ano yan, si si Gabriela Silang at si Diego Silang, I think they express that they are Ilocano, di ba? Parang ganyan, no? Have our these ancestral cultures of the 19th, we're just talking about the 19th century, hindi masyado matagal to, ano na ba, are they conscious about their ethno-linguistic their ethnicity, no? Surely they are, pero so far I don't know, mas alam nyo to, no? Kung ano yung sagot dito. What is the earliest point where we have documentation of people living in the Cordillera proclaiming themselves who they are, saying that they're Ifugao, they're Ibaloy, they're Bontok, right? They can Kanay. Ano ba yung mga early? Kasi so far we're getting it from the ethnographers, the American, no? And etong sa Spanish ethnographers, they just call them Igorotes, no? Yun lang. So this is an interesting point. Kasi a couple of decades is long enough for cultural change, as we all know. So, paano pa kaya yung century sa pinag-usapan natin? No? Pero, so yun lang ang opinion ko doon sa punto na yun. No?
Thank you, Dr. Paz. Professor Sabóy, idikit ko na rin po dito from Jim Libiran, when can we see a compilation of stories of other Kalinga Mengors?
Warriors, yeah.
Okay po.
Salamat, Direk Jim. Dapat tanungin natin dyan si Karomi. But one of the things we do right now is to try to recover stories about our cultural heroes. And so part of the language and culture documentation I do is to record these stories from the mouths of our elders. And so hopefully we will be able to come up with that compilation na sinasabi po ni Direk Jim. And in relation to yung issue ng ethnicity nga, maganda yung punto na sinabi ni Professor Paz. Kasi hindi lang naman yung term na Kalinga, no? Maraming terms like Tingyan. Even yung mga Ifugaos were referred to as Tingyanes before. Because it's an exonym. Now, if you go to Cole and Lambrecht, ang klaro doon is that Tingyan is an exonym, pero kung tatanim ng mga tao mismo daw noon, at least in the early 1900s, sabi ni Lambrecht, ang tawag sa kanila, their endonym, ay Itinag, because they're close to the Tinag River. In the same vein, yung Kalinga is also an amorphous, has an amorphous connotation depending on the time frame. Say, for example, kung titingnan mo yung political subdivisions ngayon dito sa Cordillera, kung dito yung Kalinga, okay, klaro, ito yung pala yung political territory ng Kalinga. Pero culturally, Kalinga also extends to Western Abra and even in Eastern Mountain Province. Kasi may Kalinga tribes sa Mountain Province, sa Majokayong, sa Eastern Abra naman, nandun yung mga Vanao na kasama sa ethno-linguistic group namin. So tama po yung sinabi agree ako sa sinabi ni Professor Paz that when it comes to ethnicity, it's also good to consider the time frame and to also look into the development of those terms and the sources of those labels.
Thank you, Professor Sabóy. At totoo nga po yung mga borders, mga boundaries sa Cordillera ay variable over time. In fact, yung
Right.
publication ni Bagamaspad and Hamada Pawit, you can see yung paiba-ibang shape ng Benguet, Abra, Kalinga through the Spanish colonized centuries.
Sorry, Mike, madagdag ko lang, no?
Yes,
Kasi,
go ahead.
kasi pati itong term na Igorot, kasi nabanggit kanina, sometimes we think of Igorot culture as monolithic. Parang, Igorot, ito ang characteristics nila, ito yung kanilang beliefs and practices. But if you come to look at it closely, there are actually Igorot cultures. Kasi napakarami in my province, in our province alone in Kalinga, there are 7 languages and dozens of dialects, and each language also represents a particular set of subculture. So what is true to the Ifugaos may not necessarily be true to the Kalingas or to the Ibaloys. And so sa akin, I always tell myself to watch yung aking language, even yung generalizations ko, because I might be misconstrued as tacking certain characteristics on the Igorots as a whole, when in fact that particular label or characteristic only applies to a subset of that multicultural grouping.
Yes, Dr. Paz, go ahead. Sir Vic, you're muted.
In a way, listening to the paper of Flores and Sion, sabi ko, napaka-general yata na ginamit ng Igorot na lang. Pero sa punto na gusto nilang i-deliver, mas appropriate na Igorot na lang. Kasi kung dinifferentiate pa nila, mas may komplikado. No? Kasi ang point naman ng paper nila is resistance, no? Of the Cordillera cultures to Spanish colonialism. So okay na yon, term na yon, no? Tawagin na lang na Igorot, no? But I totally agree, no? Sa sobrang daming ethno-linguistic groups, and ako nga may problema pa ako eh. If you look at for me, Tingyan is not considered Igorot in the general sense of the word. Sa literature lang, no? Parang siyempre lahat yan Igorot dahil all the mountains, pero parang yung Tingyan, parang iba yung, maybe it's because of the Cooper Call, no? Kasi napuruhan eh. Napuruan ng yung mga places na napuruan, no? Kalinga, Bontok, no, Linjengs, no. Sino nga sa Kalinga ethnographer, but it's the literature, no. It dictates also the amount our initial perceptions about that Cordillera, and of course Scotty's work is very influential.
Thank you, Dr. Paz. We have Professor Tara Reyes sharing a source para kay Miss Sion at kay Demi and Dev, so we can share that to you later. No? We have a question addressed to Dr. Paz and Professor Sabóy at the same time. No? In the Cordillera until now, Cordillerans still use the word Tagababa, referring to all people non-native in the region. Can we relate this to the result of colonial concept that people in the Cordillera were not really colonized compared to those in the lowlands? This actually relates to an experience that it seems using the term Tagababa or lowlanders is discriminating or not really.
Again, my short answer is that it depends on what time period and the context of the statement. No? It is no different from, for me, Tagababa is just descriptive of where you are. No? Parang taga-ilog, di ba? Or taga-bundok. No? But depende sa context, right? It is like pag sumisigaw ako nung bata ka sa bayan, oy, wala tayo sa bundok, di ba? Pero sa bundok, hindi naman ibig sabihin na derogatory na taga-bundok ka ng ganyan, no? But at one point, it can be. So, context is everything for me. And there is always appropriation. You know? So, what is negative before is could easily be not negative anymore. And what is positive is easily demonized later on. So that's my but what is clear is the differentiation. You are differentiating yourself from those who are not you within your community, for better or for worse. So there are many scales of this. Remember that old study in the sixth, the Aswang synchronism, where it is demonstrated that in many cultures, aswang is a way of forcing people to conform. If you don't conform, then you are called an aswang. That's a wonderful insight from that very old study that in the 1960s. I can still see the the monograph. Hindi ko na maalala kung sino nagsulat. Yeah. So I'm sorry. That's my answer.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Paz. We have a message from our organizers.
Si Professor Sabóy hindi sumagot.
Ay, opo. I-announce ko lang po that according to our organizers, we will close at 11:45. So last couple of questions now. So Professor Sabóy, please go ahead with your reaction, and then maybe one more. Yep.
Yeah, of course, I agree with Professor Paz's notes there. Isang kasi nabanggit yung context, illustrate ko lang din na even among Koreans themselves, may mga ganyan na use of terms that yung us versus them, you know. For example, the term ilagud, kasi ang nanay ko ay taga-Bontoc siya, no? At pag sinasabi ng ilagud, meaning south of the river, they refer to the Kalingas and they use that term in a derogatory manner. So even among some Kalingas, na pag sinasabing Upper Kalinga and Lower Kalinga, may iba-ibang connotation yan. Mga kawitan daw yung iba, yung na ibig sabihin, they're war freak, mga ganyan. So it's important to look really at the context. Who is speaking? Ano yung vantage point nila? Ba? Ano yung context ng kanilang discourse? So yan lang po.
Thank you, Professor Sabóy. So right now it's 11:44. Meron po tayong mga questions pa na hindi na nabasa dito, but maybe our organizers we can communicate this to our speakers sa session 1. So I'd like to thank everyone in the session, all our speakers, Professor Jose de Vega, Demi and Dev. Thank you, Professor Sabóy, and of course our keynote from Dr. Victor Paz. And so we will take our lunch break, and we will reconvene at 1:30 for session 2. We have speakers Professor Dorecampo, John Hontanar, Roland Bangkawili, and ASP's very own Kim Reyes. So that starts at 1:30 p.m. session 2. We hope to see you there later. And again, we'd like to thank the
Saan ang lunch
organizers.
natin, Migs? Saan ang lunch?
Sir, papunta na raw pa yung Grab. Joke lang.
Pwedeng pa-email.
So, yep, we'd like to thank our conference committee, Ellie Lim, the head, Liz Adriano, Jane Carlos, Ares Pigar, and Ana Pineda. So see you later. Thank you very much.
Maraming salamat po.
Maraming salamat.
See you later.
All right. Thank you so much, Sir Migs, our moderator, Professor Canilao, our keynote speaker, Dr. Paz, and to our session 1 speakers. Thank you so much for that wonderful first session of our conference. To our session 1 speakers, you may answer the questions still in the Q&A box if you want to, or if we can forward them to you later on through email. And so we will take a little more than 1 hour lunch break before we start our next session. We will resume at 1:15 p.m. and you may access the webinar through the same link. So thank you all for joining this morning session, and we will see you at 1:15 p.m. for the afternoon session. Good noon and stay safe.